Hello, and welcome to the No Wrong Notes podcast, a show hosted by me, Veronica Kokos, holistic voice teacher and singer just like you. Grab a cup of tea, relax, and sit back as we discuss all things singing technique, mindset tips, and more so you can show up as the most confident and creative singer you can be. Hey, y'all, and welcome to another episode of No Wrong Notes. In this week's episode, I'm sharing an interview I did with Keely Phillips-Carter, a fellow voice teacher who is a fountain of knowledge when it comes to musical theater repertoire. I came across her profile on TikTok a few years ago when I saw a video she posted where she was recommending specific musical theater audition songs for a certain show and character. And I especially love how she recommends songs from lesser known musicals. I think that is so cool. She knows so much about musical theater rep. And when I was deciding on guests for this podcast, I knew I wanted to have her on to discuss this topic. Before we dive in, I want to share a little bit about Keely and who she is. Keely Phillips-Carter is a voice teacher and performer located in the Raleigh-Durham area. She holds a performance certificate in musical theater from the American Musical and Dramatic Academy, AMDA, in New York City, as well as a bachelor's degree in classical voice from Valdosta State University in Valdosta, Georgia. Keely opened KPC Voice Studio in 2014, and many of her students have placed in competitions and have moved on to collegiate voice and theater programs. In 2020, she expanded her studio offerings to include personalized repertoire packages. Phillips-Carter also runs a TikTok account at KPC Voice Studio where she creates free musical theater repertoire content to help level the playing field of accessibility in the performing arts. Keely presented her first repertoire-focused lecture to the NATS Mid-Atlantic Regional Conference in March 22 entitled I listened to 100 flop musicals so you didn't have to. In 2023, she was chosen to be the musical theater presenter at the Nats Summer Workshop in San Diego and went on to repeat those lectures for North Carolina's Musical Theater Conference that fall. I hope you enjoy this episode and check out the link in the show description for more info on Keely and her personalized repertoire packages. Today, I am here with Miss Keely Phillips-Carter, the infamous Keely Phillips-Carter, who's all over TikTok. I wanted to bring you on to kind of talk about repertoire today. One thing I really love about your content on social media is how much you talk about repertoire or songs that are maybe not done as often in auditions and in performances. And so I'm really happy to have you here today to talk about some of that.
Well, thank you so much. This is my first podcast ever, so I'm not going to lie, I'm a little nervous, but I'm really excited and I'm really glad you have invited me.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and dive right into things here. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today in your career as a voice teacher?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from a small town in South Georgia called Tifton, Georgia, which is about 70 miles from the Florida state line. So I grew up in a very small town community. But one of the cool things about where I lived was we had a bunch of women specifically who were very adamant about the arts being accessible to everybody. Specifically, a woman named Sid Blackmar, who actually won an award, the first public service award given by the NEA many years ago. She brought in, so say an opera singer or a jazz musician or a flamenco dancer was going from Atlanta to Miami, she would get them to stop on a Tuesday night in our small town. And so I was exposed to a lot of different artistic endeavors at a pretty young age. And so I think that fed into the things I found interesting. I saw Les Mis when I was 7 or 8 years old. So then I decided I wanted to do that. And my parents were very kind and very supportive and thought, she'll grow out of that. No, she did not. I auditioned for college in 2002 And one of the things I used to audition, and I say this now because it kind of shaped who I am, was Send in the Clowns from A Little Night Music.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that song is a woman in her 40s or 50s talking about the irony of figuring out what you want in life, but it's literally just walked past you. And my 17-year-old behind thought I could understand that. No. I got into school, luckily, because they usually would ask me to sing something else. And I went to school for musical theater at the American Music and Dramatic Academy before they had a BFA. So I got a performance degree. And then I ended up getting into classical music because my voice teacher there was like, you have this really big voice, and this is not a world that likes you right now. So went back to Georgia, got a classical music degree, and then was bopping my way up the East Coast looking for jobs. And I've also always really found music that maybe nobody else wanted to sing that I found really interesting. We did a zarzuela in my college program, which is a Spanish operetta. And that was something I adored. I would always try to choose the weird song from the famous composer. Like I sang some Samuel Barber, but I would sing like My Lizard, which if you are a classical musician,
yeah. Okay.
that one's out there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I do too. And I love it because it's one of those things that you're like, this makes no sense, but okay. And all the while I was still talking about, I wanted to do theater. I wanted to do both things. I didn't see why that was a problem. And when I was going through my second degree, that was definitely, these were separated worlds. We didn't do both things. Thank goodness that has started to change, and people are like, oh wait, if you want to sing, you might want to be able to navigate all styles of music. I fell into teaching by accident, like many people do, as a source of income. I started by teaching group theater classes, and I've always just amassed this knowledge of music and been like, oh, well, if you like, say your school's doing Bye Bye Birdie, why don't we do something kind of like that, but different, so you can be exposed to something else of the era. And it just sort of grew from there. I have like 6 tiny notebooks just full of music ideas, and I opened my studio 10 years ago and became the musical theater nerd of the Raleigh-Durham area. And then that solely has given me a reputation. And during the pandemic, like everybody else, I got on TikTok, because one of the things that the arts does is gives everyone something to talk about, but there's a lot of hurdles to get into it. And I liked the idea of a free, accessible program where I'm like, oh, here's a bunch of music you've probably never heard of, but you can find on Google, and it's easy to get the sheet music. And why don't I start sharing my knowledge? And so that's kind of, yeah, my roundabout long version of my story.
I love that. That is super cool. And like I said, one of the reasons that I was really drawn to your content online is because you do talk about lesser performed songs, roles, that sort of thing. And you and I are kind of similar in that, like, when I was in college and in grad school, I was also into doing like lesser known songs, and like I remember for like my senior recital in undergrad, I did this like song cycle by Libby Larson, and it was all about like Calamity Jane's letters to her daughter. So it was something like really far out there, like 20th century thing. And so I'm always looking for like new songs for my students. And I really, as much as I love a good rendition of Popular from Wicked, it always is fun to discover new things. Digging in a little bit to your work with your students, as someone whose students have been accepted to top programs such as Shenandoah Conservatory and other prestigious institutions, what advice would you have for a younger singer who's maybe in middle school, high school, who might be looking to pursue music or musical theater programs in college?
So the first thing I tell my kids is it's about you and what you want, not necessarily what you think you're supposed to do. Because I see so many kids, if I'm not accepted to one of the big 5 programs, I'm not going to be successful. If I'm not in a BFA program, I'm not going to be successful. And I have found through colleagues who went to school in New York, colleagues working all over the world, it's about what you find in it. So the first thing I always ask is, what do you want to do? I'm a big believer, like, my hope is if a student is taking lessons with me, we're going to do one classical piece of music, a couple musical theater, one pop song, but I want to make sure they can walk out the door being like, I've experienced all of this. Now, do I want to make a kid sing an Italian art song if they'd rather, walk into traffic? No, 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 no. Do I have kids who look at me and are like, I do not want to sing a Taylor Swift song. I don't care how many times everyone else says they want to. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I think play is the biggest, and experimenting is the biggest thing I tell people. If you can afford a voice teacher, find someone you feel comfortable with, find someone who you feel challenges you, but doesn't make you feel bad or guilty about something. I think that's a hard balance for some teachers. I think it's also a hard balance because not every kid responds the same way. I'm in a very affluent area. I'm also in an area with a bunch of awesome voice teachers. And we all get along for the most part, which is not normal. And we know that sometimes we are not the person. Like, I've had a kid come to me, be like, I need to be in your studio. And I'm like, you really don't? I will make you cry every week. Here is this person. And they got into a great school with them. And I had no qualms about it. They have sent me, actually, I ended up with that person's sibling because she needed a little bit of a darker sense of humor. And so I think it's about, especially for younger singers, it's figuring out what you want. Listen to your teachers, try things. You may think at first that something's a terrible idea, but unless it hurts or physically makes you uncomfortable, give it a shot. What's the worst thing that can happen? I say that a lot in my studio, and sometimes they come up with very interesting answers. Like, really? The world is not going to end because you squeaked a high note. I promise. I've heard many.
I love that. I totally agree with you in that I encourage play with my own students and experimentation and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it's like, what do you want to do? I think the earlier that you can learn the lesson that doing what everybody else wants you to do or doing what you think that what you should do, that often, it can be an interesting road and an interesting journey going through those things. But what I've found more often than not is that going kind of with what I want and need and what I need out of a certain experience, going that direction and kind of foregoing what maybe I think I should do often results in more happiness overall in the end, And I think that especially if you want to go into music or musical theater, it's like you're going to really be, especially if you're going into it as a career, you're going to have a lot of hurdles to clear. You're going to have a lot of struggles along the way. It's a hard road to walk, and really going into that path, as you and I both know. And I think if you're really going to be committed to it, you'll want to be committed to something that you're passionate about, that you care about, that you want to do, right? Anyway, kind of moving on here to more of the audition rep side of things. Like I said, love the videos on social media that discuss audition rep. I probably have like 15 of your videos favorited on TikTok and Instagram, and I often refer to them when I'm looking for new song suggestions if I'm really feeling stuck. What are things that singers should consider if they are picking repertoire for themselves? Like maybe they don't have a voice teacher and they're kind of digging into this stuff on their own.
I think that's a good question. One of the things I always try to do, because I will do coachings, and if people are walk in and be like, I'm auditioning for college, I hear bunches of people singing "She Used to Be Mine." Do I do that? And I'm like, do you think you can do that as well or better than all of those people? Okay, then what other Cerebrella songs do you like? What other things of this genre, of that folky musical, do you like? And it's a lot of spreading out that way. I also encourage kids, especially people learning how their voice is functioning, say a beautiful dancer who maybe has had some pitch issues, because Broadway is definitely full, and I mean that in the nicest way. Broadway is full of those people, and I can't do a triple turn, but I can hit a high C. So those were my skill sets. Looking at the old stuff, looking at classic era musicals, looking at the 30s, looking at Cole Porter, there is nothing wrong with it being old because a lot of it stands the test of time. I always find it interesting. A couple years ago, I gave a student "To Keep My Love Alive," which is this great 30s jazzy ballad that you can go faster, go slower. And it's her talking about killing all of these husbands. So it's just this list. And it's so, Ella Fitzgerald did a great cover of it at some point. But we did it at the recital, and I always ask parents and students, what songs did you enjoy? What did you find interesting? And everyone mentioned that song. And they were like, what's that from? I'm like, a 1930s musical. And they were like, oh. So I think people automatically want to do what's new. And I think leaning a little bit backwards is not ever a bad thing, especially when you are learning how your voice functions. It's a great way to not put that pressure on yourself, because Santa Fe and those kinds of things come with like must hit high note, versus older stuff does has some of that, but it's also here's you telling a good story. Here's us having this good time together. And I think sometimes in exploration of rep, that's a good place to go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right in that when it comes to a lot of contemporary musicals, at least from like what I've seen in working with my students on these different songs, I mean, it seems like a lot of, and this is not to throw shade on anybody, but it seems like a lot of these composers are kind of writing for like higher and beltier, and it's like seeing how high and belty we can go, and it's like that can be a lot of fun. And I think that expanding your horizons into kind of like what might be, older, that could be just as fun, that could
Yeah.
be even more helpful. And something that I love doing too is like also asking students, like, what other Sarah Bareilles songs do you like? Or even going on like Spotify,
Oh yeah.
and like if there's like a radio for a certain song, like She Used to Be Mine, for example, there probably is a radio station that's created for that song, and going in there and just kind of digging around. I think that that's really, really great advice for sure.
The other two things I say is look at songs that were cut from the show. Giving Waitress is an example again. Door Number 3 was a song written for Jenna that I'm actually using with a senior for her recital. And it's such a great song. Usually songs are cut because they've adapted something in the plot where that song doesn't work, or they've run out of time. And a lot of the times, cut songs are just so good. Sondheim's cut songs are most of the time better than some of the stuff that ends up in the show. No one come at me. I will love multitudes of Amy's from Company until I die. But like, yeah, looking for stuff like that. The other thing is I ask kids what artists do they think they most resemble, and we'll look at their show catalog, or look at, say, someone like Sutton Foster has put out studio albums of things she loves doing. And we'll play with, oh, do you like this? How about this? This may not come from a show, but is from a musical theater composer like Shana Taub, Drew Gasparini. A lot of them have standalone material that are musical theater songs that people sort of forget because they're not from a show proper. And so those always end up coming up in our studio as well.
That's great. And when it comes to songs that are cut from the show, this might be a dumb question, but where do you usually find like those kinds of songs when it's like maybe you don't even know that there's cut songs from a certain show?
So a lot of composers have started putting them as bonus tracks on cast albums. For example, if you the Little Shop revival from 2003, you can hear the Dentist's original song, which is called I Found a Hobby. Like a lot of them will just add them on at the end. Big Fish, Magic in the Man is the last song on the thing. And I was immediately obsessed with that song. Or Sarah Bareilles' development album of Waitress, Door Number 3 is on that. She also did it on TV, which is where I remember it from.
Okay. Okay. That is super cool. Didn't even think of that. So that is really, really helpful. Did you have anything else to add on to that, or does that kind
That
of
sort
cover
of
all
covers
bases?
that. Yeah. The idea of looking up artists. I know I have a student who is obsessed with Robert Preston. And so
Oh, nice.
the
Okay.
baritone erasure is real. He's very sad. He's like, I top out at a G. Can they stop? And I'm like, we can move the key. That's the other thing, especially with younger singers,
Mhm.
unless it completely changes the entire, like, actually, no, that's not even true. There are like 3 songs you can't move for an audition. For practice or for your voice lessons or for a recital, absolutely. But if you're going in, they want to hear the A for Santa Fe. Same thing with Made of Stone. Think of Me, we have to hear the high C. Like those
Mhm.
things have to stay. Move the key everywhere else. Very rarely will a person sitting in an audition realize it's not the real key unless you go like down a fourth. And hey, I've definitely done that
Yeah.
for specific things, because it's about you telling a story. And if you need to move it around, move it around. I think kids get so obsessed with the idea of we have to do this. And Music Notes makes it really easy. Or go find a college kid in a music program who can move music for you.
Yeah.
They will do it in a heartbeat for reasonable amounts of money. I think one of my former students charges like $5 or $6 a page to transpose stuff that's not
Oh.
available. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so things like that make it really easy and more accessible than, and again, Music Notes does it for you, which is great, but sometimes they don't have those keys on Music Notes and you need that key. And we did it in the classical world for decades with art songs. So
Yes.
I think encouraging musical theater kids to find a different key, because and it's actually, as much as I had feelings, they moved the keys for Aaron Tveit. They'll move the key for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yes, I'm with you on that. Because,
Yeah.
um, going back to the baritone erasure, I had a student last year who, like, he studied with me before he went to college, and he's like a hardcore bass and loves musical theater, especially modern contemporary musical theater, and he wants to
Oh
do all of
man.
these. And I was like, oh no. I was like,
Hades. Hades is going to be you. And Patrick Bateman is actually a bass.
okay, that's really
Because
helpful.
it's a synth score, people don't realize. But yeah, Benjamin Walker does not sing high. Bloody Billy Andrew Jackson, it's a baritone bass role. You just,
Wow. Okay. That's good to
yeah.
know. That's good to know for sure. Awesome. Going to more repertoire topics, I recently saw a post on the Professional Voice Teachers Facebook group, which always,
Sorry.
always,
It's
always
fine.
some
I'm fine.
interesting topics of conversation on there. It was discussing commonly performed songs. And how do you feel about bringing commonly performed songs into an audition?
I think it depends. There are certain things that I call the great equalizer. For example, again, rolling back to classical music because it's a really easy thing. Like all of us had to do Musetta's Waltz in some way, shape, or form, right? Like anybody who had a soprano, yeah, same. That was there. And I was like, I will never get this job
Right?
ever, but we all did it, right? As a part of
Yep.
like an aria package at some point. I never understood that, but there's the great equalizer pieces. Those I usually try to avoid unless I know that's that person, for example. Or what I will do is say a kid is a perfect Sally Bowles in cabaret. We're not going to do cabaret or maybe this time. We're going to do perfectly marvelous, because people forget that piece exists and it shows a lot of the same things without being one of those songs. Now, I think you can do those songs. I think I have certain ones I never want to hear again, but that's because I have personal association. And so sometimes you're going to get somebody in that room who has PTSD, and it's not you. It has nothing to do with you. We just had to do it so much. Like, I never want to hear 16 going on 17. I have done Liesl enough in my life where that will never, that's fine. But I think if it's something you're passionate about, you can tell that story well, and you could get that job, do it. Absolutely. If it is a stretch for you, maybe find something else. But there are certain things that are timeless. Like I will always listen to I'll Know or If I Were a Bell from Guys and Dolls, because there's so much different stuff you as a performer can do with it. I'm trying to think of a male option to that. Oh, it's gone. Oh, it's Irving Berlin. It's a Lovely Day Today. You can do a lot of fun things with that. That one's a little more retro, but When He Sees Me from Waitress, I'm going to just keep throwing out Waitress because that's apparently what's on my brain right now. There are a lot of different ways to do that. You don't have to do it the same way. If you can make your own choices and feel very comfortable in what you're doing, I think that's absolutely something you can do. But again, walk in knowing that maybe we've heard it 3 or 4 times before, and it's not you. It's just we've heard it 3 or 4 times before.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I feel like. Obviously, trained classically, most of my performing experience and auditioning experience is kind of in that world. But I feel that way when it comes to Caro Mio Ben. I mean, like
I've
literally,
taught it
as much as
once. I have taught it once. and it needed to happen. But man, if I'm like, if I can find an alternative, we will.
Right. Like, I mean, so many of those 24 Italian art songs and arias, I'm just like, I want to like bang my head against the wall. I've heard them so many times. And like, as much as I love Beyonce and love Cowboy Carter, and like, honestly, the song that she uses it in is really, I think she does a really clever interpretation of it and everything. But I still was like, God, I still hate this song so
I'm
much.
glad it's not just me who's like, as soon as I saw the news article, I was like, so I'm gonna have to deal with that now.
It's like,
Great.
and like I said, I mean, and honestly, she does some really cool things with it. She adds like some, ornamentation onto it that I think is really clever. So like, no shade to that at all. But
No,
like,
no, it's
I
just that
think
moment
it's
we
one of
all
those,
went.
right? It's not you, it's me with this
Yes,
thing.
absolutely. And I definitely have been in an audition when a kid was like, I'm gonna sing, da da da. And I literally put my hands on the table and I took a deep breath and I looked up and said, I don't want you to take anything from what's going on in my face. It is not you. And then he knocked it out of the park. So I was like, yay. But then
Yay!
like, no, not again. Okay. A King George's song. There was a period of time where I had to hear King George's song from Hamilton
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
every audition at like and competition at least 4 or 5 times. And I was just like, someone anything else. Just do Elton John, because that's what that's supposed to be. Anything.
Right?
Yeah.
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 So, like, going to other things that people can do, if someone wanted to learn more about lesser known musicals, repertoire, where might they start their research? And maybe we talked about some of this stuff already in terms of like going to the singers that you like, the musicals that you like already, and kind of seeing like on Spotify,
Yeah.
what might be on those radio stations. But if you have anything else to add on that.
One of the things I did was I went back at, there's a really amazing company called City Center Encores. They do 4 or 5 shows a year. The subtitle I call of their program is It's a Great Score, but because there's a lot of great music, but they pick musicals sometimes with some terrible books. They're doing Titanic next. So I started, they have an archive where you can look at all the shows they've done that were yesteryear shows. And I ended up obsessed with a lot of musicals from that and started building sort of my like, okay, so maybe you want a show from the 60s or 80s that didn't do so well. Here's some stuff that's got great music in it. That's a great way. There are a lot of college textbooks like the oh so traditional Not Since Carrie, which you can order online. I still have my Broadway musical show by show book, and I just read a lot and find a composer, go to their Wikipedia page. Inevitably, there's going to be at least one show you've not heard of, and you can go find it on Google or Spotify. I try to use YouTube Music, which is also a really good resource, because sometimes there are things on YouTube that aren't on Spotify and vice versa. But yeah,
Yeah,
those are the
definitely,
kind of
definitely.
things I do.
Cool, very cool. I think these are great jumping off places for like digging into some of that. And for the last formal question here, what is your number one pet peeve when it comes to repertoire?
I have to do this and I have to belt and I have to use this part of my voice. No, no, you don't. No, you don't. It's there's so much obsession with the idea of chest voice, head voice. What do I use? How do I make it work? Like, I need this. No, what you need is a balanced voice in the appropriate stylistic choices that suits you. Something that, say, Barrett Wilbert Weed, who from Heathers, because this is one I had to do a lot, was people wanted to bring that, or sing I'd Rather Be Me for Mean Girls, and just bring up all their chest voice. And a 15 and 16-year-old has a different developed mechanism than a 25, 27-year-old person. And that's just fine. I think one of the things that I have to remind students of often is you are young. There's not a problem, and there's not a problem with the squeak. If your voice is your muscles are figuring out what they're doing. Sometimes they're going to go for a hot second, and that does not mean the end of the world. It means that you're processing through these muscular growths. But you are 15, 16, 17 years old. This person singing 8 times a week on Broadway is 25, 35. You don't have the capability to sound like them yet, and that's fine. No one
Yes.
needs you to sound like Idina Menzel today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is so important to remember, especially with younger singers, because I mean, I have one student in particular who has been taking lessons with me for a long time, and they're still kind of in that place where, like, voice changes. I mean, they're with girls, for example, especially girls that are going through puberty, the changes with the vocal folds and what's going on here, it's not going to be quite as severe as when it comes to boys. It's not going to be quite
No.
as noticeable, but it's still very much a thing.
Yeah.
And I was explaining to them, they haven't quite reached that point where, like, we've been doing a lot of work on vocal fold closure, doing like SOVTs, doing even just like onset work to kind of work on that. But at the same time, like, there's only so much that you can do within that,
Yeah.
where it's like sometimes you just need the physical stuff to catch up with the technical work that you're doing, right? And especially with this student, they love singing Taylor Swift songs. And occasionally we'll do a beltier Taylor Swift song. And something that we're always talking about is like, okay, what can we do in the context of the things that we know how to do that are still like comfortable, that are not, where we're not pushing, trying to
Yeah.
sound like Taylor Swift, because Taylor Swift is a 34-year-old woman, and you are
Whose
14 years
range
old.
is freakish. Like I'm like,
I know.
and it's amazing. It is in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
I think she might be a contralto if we
I
were really
think,
going to
yeah,
designate her,
yeah.
which is, those are rare, shiny birds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so like every time I have a kid wanting to do a song for her, I'm like, we're moving it up at least a fourth,
Yep.
maybe a fifth, because and like unless there's something very specific at the bottom we're going to do, or I have a mezzo-y mezzo, there's that. But no, the other thing I run into a lot is, and again, this is part of what the area I live in with, there's so many fantastic teachers, there's so many amazing talented kids, there's so many opportunities. One of the things I'm really proud of with us as a studio, and it's something that a lot of my colleagues also try to encourage, but maybe not their theater teachers, is comparison. You soprano who can hit the D6 are not the same person who plays Katie in Mean Girls, and that's okay. You both are awesome. You both are going to amazing colleges. These two actually, and it's about like they're, oh well, I have to do this. I have to be better than this person. I'm like, no, you have to be on your own journey, because especially with different voice types, and I tell this to my lower singers, my mezzos especially, you sopranos, it feels like there's a progress step every week. Everything is developing, everything is working. Mezzos, it's like you sit in the same position for like 12 weeks, and then all of a sudden you take a massive leap forward, and then you sit in the same position for the next 12 weeks, and it's like, so it's just different things happen for different people in different ways, and it's totally cool. It's not about, oh, I have to get first place at Nats, or oh, I have to get this role. It's about what makes the most sense for you, and what is the journey you're on. I mean, so today for my studio is senior day, and I put out where everybody's going to college, and we have 4 people going to school for music or theater or related issues, and then we have 4 people going to school for other stuff. And everyone's things go out together. It's not like there is any difference.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really important, is for especially for teens and younger singers, focus on what you're doing, celebrate your friends' accomplishments, because building a community is so much more important than feeling like you got to beat everybody. You can feel that way internally. I am that person, but I do want to see everyone succeed. I
Yeah.
genuinely do. I think it's one of those things that you have to have that weird balance. And that's the other biggest pet peeve I have with some, and teachers can encourage their kids to be like, we have to be the best, and you have to do this, and you have to, and they'll like bash other kids. And I'm like, what does that serve in the long run? We all want to do this together. Everyone is stressed. Everyone is miserable. Nobody wants to sight read. And if you do, I want to know what you've done to make that work for you, because I've never made that work for me. And we're all in this together, just being like, all right, we can do this. It's going to be fine. And if we mess up, who cares?
Yes, and I love this idea of like fostering community and like not competition so much with other people, but more so just focusing on yourself, staying in your own lane, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that was something that was said a lot in my studio in grad school, where I mean, I feel like in my studio there were all these amazing singers, And at the same time, like we're all like kind of different voice types. Like one's a lyric soprano, one's like a lyric mezzo soprano. Then you have like another coloratura. But it's like one thing that was always said was like stay in your own lane and figure out what works best for you. And I feel like that's especially important when you're younger. And I think
Yes.
like if you are in environments, I've had students before that were in environments where like at school or elsewhere, where there were teachers that were kind of encouraging, like, we have to be the best, or like, you need to study with this teacher, or else, like, you're, not the best, or something like that. And it's just like, yikes. I mean, it's just like, what's the point? Like, what's the point in trying to do that and trying to pit kids against each other, or pit singers against each other when it's like, it doesn't, I mean, it's just so silly.
No, it absolutely is. I had a couple years ago, I had someone come to me from a different teacher, and the words out of her mouth were, my teacher told me I had to study with her or I wouldn't get into college. And I was like, what? I mean, unless you're doing a lot of really stupid things, I don't think I can make that. I mean, I can help. My job is to help you, but I am not the only solution to you getting into school. And if you have financial difficulties and there aren't people available at a lower rate for teachers, you can still get into college. Like that's the thing. Like I do a lot of things to try and be as helpful and as affordable as possible because again, the arts are not an affordable industry yet. Maybe one day, maybe. But like the amount of people who are like, oh, this person went to this school and that means that they, this is what they're good at. I'm like, that could have been the kid. I mean, it's probably you helped, but that could be the kid. I know I have some contribution, but the goal is for what they put in it. So
Exactly.
I that drives me crazy. That is the other thing that just
Exactly.
utterly
It's
drives me
just like,
crazy.
it's just so like delulu. I'm just like, like, why are we trying to like pit people against each other when this is a hard enough thing to do as it is, right? Auditioning
Yeah.
and performing and doing all these things that are so like high pressure environments. Like, why are we adding more onto that than needs? Like, there's no need for it. And so it's just
No.
like, yeah, but kind of getting to the end of our conversation here, is there anything that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to share with listeners who, may be interested in going to school for musical theater, or maybe they're really interested in this field, they love to sing musicals? Thinking about some of that, is there anything else that you wanted to share? Or do you feel like we kind of touched all of our bases today?
I think we did. I will say, I will do my one plug. Is if you have questions, if you want to schedule time, you can find me on social media at KPC Voice Studio. It's that moment when I forget my own handle. That's comforting. But I charge pretty reasonable fees, I hope. You're always welcome to ask questions if I can answer them quickly. I do. Ask questions. Find people. If you have a question about something, hey, I'm interested in this. Where did you find it? I've answered those questions a lot. And if I knew it was hard to get or out of print, I'll email it to kids because, again, gatekeeping is not my thing. If you want help building a book, if you want something like that, I can talk about my rates. I think for the most part, everything is around at worst $50 because again
Yeah,
the
no.
goal is to be affordable and I know
Yes.
that not all audition programs are affordable. Yeah, this is so yeah, if you have any questions or anything else, this has been a lot of fun.
Yes, and that'll be in the show notes. But
Cool.
before we kind of close things out, I want to do some rapid fire questions. Probably my favorite, well, one of my favorite parts of these things. The
Awesome.
first question I've got is coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Oh, yes. I am team coffee too. I'm like, I literally cannot. I mean,
Coffee with brown sugar and cream.
oh, that sounds really good. I often drink it black,
I
but
wish. I wish.
I,
I can't.
favorite musical at the moment?
Okay, this is never a good question. I was having the argument with a friend of mine about how She Loves Me from 1963 is the perfect musical, so that always counts. But I've been really into a musical called The Clockmaker's Daughter, which was a West End show by a gentleman named Michael Webern. I'm obsessed with that show. I play that music a lot, and a lot of my students have stuff from that as well.
Awesome. What is the last book that you rated 5 stars?
Oh, It is a book about complex trauma and PTSD called What My Bones Know, I think.
That book is so good. I read that
It was
last year.
so good.
Yes. Yes, so good. I love that book. Definitely agree with you. Agree with you there. What is the last TV show that you binged?
I'm currently binging Dead Boy Detectives on Netflix because it's
Oh,
part of the Neil Gaiman Sandman universe, and so I don't binge well because I have too much to do. But I sat down and watched like 4 episodes, and my husband was like, "Oh, it must be good."
yeah, I did see that on like the Netflix homepage. That one looked good for
It's
sure.
super cute. It's super if you like that like British punk boy humor. It's great. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Oh, nice. Also, speaking of newer stuff that came out on Netflix, have you seen Baby Reindeer yet?
No, it scares me. I'm just like anytime I see the word stalker, I'm like, nah, I'm good, man.
See, that's like the one like one of the few true crime things that I can like watch now is like I'm here for the stalkers, I'm here for the scammers.
Oh, I do scammers. I watched like 3 MLM documentaries, and then like there were 2 documentaries on like True Flame. That
Oh,
whole
yes, I love
process.
that. Yes.
I watched both the Amazon and the Netflix
Yes.
documentary back to back. I was like, this is crazy.
I love that stuff too. It's so good. My next question, if you could eat one dish or one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, probably ice cream. I love ice cream.
Ooh, yes. Ice
Or
cream is good.
honestly, mac and cheese. Just
Oh,
variations on mac and
yes.
cheese.
Yes. Definitely, definitely. What is the song that is stuck in your head right now?
Not getting married today from Company. We're doing it on my senior recital, and this is a fun story. It's 3 girls who are doing it. And so the second time I started calling it Not Getting Married to Gay, and it's sort of just stuck. So we're changing Paul to Pam, and the so it's going to be so much fun.
That is awesome. Very creative. Very creative.
Thank you.
Well, this has been a lot of fun chatting about rep, chatting about musical theater. I just had a really great time talking to you today. And thank you so much for coming on the No Wrong Notes podcast.
Thank you so much, Veronica. This has been awesome.
All right, y'all, that is all we've got for this week. Again, if you would like to find out more about Keely's repertoire packages, you can find out that information in the show description. And until next time, happy singing, y'all.